All right, so the only time I'm going to have you look at the camera is right now, and I'm just going to have you introduce yourself to the camera and tell me what grade that was and what school.
Okay. Hi, I'm Heather Tinker. I'm a fifth grade teacher at Alice Maxwell Elementary.
All right. All right, so the first section. We want to understand the decisions you made in planning for this lesson and how it fits into the unit and year. So how does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge? What was taught before this lesson and what will come after it?
So this lesson is in a unit of adding and subtracting fractions. The students previous to today's lesson were working on multiple strategies using area models to get a conceptual understanding, using the multiplication and division strategy, which we call like quick common denominators, to help get an understanding of how to add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators. This unit has been about a 4-week unit, and the students are wrapping it up by now applying to real world problems. And those go with the standards of 5NF1 and 5NF2 for fifth grade, and using equivalent fraction strategies to add and subtract fractions. The students get to work with mixed numbers, improper fractions, and then they need to work with, like today, real world problems.
Excellent. So talk about the standards or cluster targeted in this lesson. What did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard or cluster?
So the standard for fifth grade, students need to be able to add and subtract fractions using equivalent fraction strategies because the fractions have unlike denominators. This also includes mixed numbers. So students will be encountering improper fractions that they will have to change into mixed numbers in order to communicate their understanding of, what the whole is and then what the fractional piece will be. And then the second part of this cluster is applying it to real world problems, where the students are using scenarios like seen in today's lesson with the salt, where they would start with a quantity, then they would have to subtract that quantity in fractional form and be able to have a reasonable answer.
Excellent. Which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplified, and how did you plan for this?
Well, I believe it exemplifies core action 1 and 2. I think as a teacher, you strive to have all your lessons towards core action 1. Your lessons need to be aligned to the standards. It shows core action 2 because the students have multiple experiences for working with grade level work. The students have real world applications to use. They're adding and subtracting mixed numbers, adding and subtracting unlike denominators, but now we're putting it into real world context.
All right. So section 2, we are interested in how the shifts required by the CCSS are being incorporated into your classroom. So discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts required by the CCSS.
So
1 second here. Okay.
the shifts in the Common Core state standards suggest that the students are getting more focused, rigorous work. The students need to have problems that are at their grade level, and they need to have problems that lend themselves to the standards. So in this lesson, the students are working with the fractions in a way that they can apply it to real world applications. And we were trying to get them from going from the procedural understanding to a more like concrete and then being able to apply that abstractly.
How did you teach the content of this lesson prior to the CCSS? What is the same and what is different?
This is my 3rd year in 5th grade, and previously we have done kind of, you teach the algorithm, you teach, you can just multiply your denominators together, and then that's where you get your new common denominator. Right now, we really want the students to have a conceptual understanding, so we were using area models to show where is that common denominator coming from. The students were discovering strategies themselves, and through teaching the area model, students were able to develop an understanding of where the quick common denominators came from and use that understanding and now apply it to other situations and other problems.
All right. Third section. Student engagement is crucial to the work of the CCSS. We want to understand how you ensured that all students had the opportunity to productively engage in the work of the lesson. How did students handle this lesson? Did they understand the mathematics of this lesson? And how do you know?
So for student engagement, I make sure that all of my students are accountable. I have superhero villain partnership. I have a superhero themed classroom. So the students know who the superhero is, they know who the villain is, and they need to take turns teaching and talking to one another. Also in their table groups, they work cooperatively to solve problems and then transfer that to eventual independent practice. For this lesson, I noticed that the students were struggling with identifying, they were using a problem, they were using math in context of a word problem. They were able to show strategies, they were able to understand adding or subtracting the fractions, but they weren't able to apply that to the word problem presented to them.
Explain how you differentiated in this lesson. Did all students have the opportunity to work on grade level content? If students did not have this opportunity, please explain why.
So I have purposeful partners for my students. When I put them into their fraction partners, they have partners that they would be able to communicate with that are a little high. Like I partner a low achieving student with a medium achieving student so they can still have meaningful conversations with one another, as opposed to going with low achieving student to extremely high achieving student, where the high student would do all the work and then the low student would be like, okay, I'll go with what you're saying. So I make sure that all my students have the ability to communicate their understanding to one another, and then they can apply that to their independent practice. Differentiation in the classroom is based on student work, independent student work, and then I use that to guide my small group instruction later.
Okay. Which behaviors from Core Action 3 did the students best exemplify in this lesson? What actions have you taken as a teacher to make that happen?
Okay.
Core Action 3.
In Core Action 3, the students are asked to look at other students' work and talk about reasonableness and talk about justifications for their answers. And this lesson gave the students opportunities to see multiple strategies, as well as, ask questions of their peers and say, well, why did you use this strategy? Or why did you come to your answer? And another indicator of Core Action 3 is the students get to select their own strategies or tools to solve problems. And the students weren't told one specific way to solve our whole class discussion problem. They determined what they wanted to do on their own.
All right. Would you like to comment on any of the submitted student work? Was there something that delighted or surprised you with this work?
I noticed with one of my table groups, the students were trying to use a new strategy that we have not discussed. They were trying to apply the adding and subtracting of fractions on a number line, which is a huge Common Core component. The students need to be able to place fractions on number lines and then use them as a tool. It was exciting to see the students use that without coaching or teaching from me.
All right. So last section, last two questions. Reflecting on the lesson, what worked particularly well and what might you do differently?
I believe in the beginning of the lesson, the students having the opportunity to partner, teach one another works very well. The students get to hear the content from another perspective, not just mine, not just theirs. Now they get a third perspective from another student. partner teaching allows the students to get another opportunity to see the concept and get a better understanding of it. Some things that I would change, if a lesson isn't going the way that you like it to go, or you're noticing the students aren't applying their strategies to the real world context, maybe we need to stop and step back and say, okay, how does this problem apply to the word problem on the board? And so I think that's the direction I would go next, is say, let's just think about the words. Let's think about what we're trying to solve, and then let's apply the math next, so we can get a real good understanding of what we're trying to solve.
All right. Were there any surprises or unexpected student behaviors or reactions?
I have some students talk about, confusion with some models. I had one student apply order of operations, which we went over at the very beginning of the year, and that's a surprise that they're bringing in other content to the fraction content, and that shows me that they're thinking and they are being problem solvers in a sense. I wouldn't say there was any surprising or misbehavior that I didn't expect. I did have a few students that were disengaged. What I would like to do for those students is, give them more opportunities to share, and I think some of them just needed to get up more or be more interactive with the math.
All right.
Cool.
Well, that's it. That was easy enough, huh?
Yeah.